Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Blueprint webinar, Understanding Your Company's Data Maturity. My name is Josh Hofstead. I'm the Director of Product Management at Blueprint. I also have Chris Honcoop with me and Dan VanderHoek, both solution architects with Blueprint Technology. Blueprint Technology focuses on solution delivery and product development. We have a long history in data solutions, data pipelines, data consolidation, reporting and analytics, and data science. And one of the things that we thought would be interesting to talk about today would be the assessments that we make when we go into a new client, understanding sort of where they are on their journey, their data journey, and what that assessment allows us to figure out what solutions are going to be pertinent for the organization. And it helps us to both implement more effectively and also help to transition the business more effectively to the new solution we bring on board. So we will go to our first slide here. So this is Gartner's data maturity spectrum. We want to spend a little bit of time talking through the various components of this, and I'll just give a rough example of what of a couple of companies that we can understand sort of how to think about these various categories within the spectrum. But if you see, starting off on the left side of the screen, we start off at basic and move through transformational. And each step along the way, these aren't hard and fast definitions. Again, it's just a framework for trying to understand the overall data maturity of an organization. And even within Blueprint itself, we frequently talked about the concept of a pre-basic. Companies that are potentially still don't even have a database solution in place. They're still doing everything in Excel and utilizing lots of email. So, but if we think about starting on the left with basic, a lot of times what we're talking about is companies that they are utilizing data in some way, shape, or form. So they're collecting the data. They may be consolidating it in certain ways, but they're not exploiting it for additional insight and higher level analysis. It would be akin to an e-commerce system that gathers customer information and utilizes that to execute a transaction, but that's it. The companies develop systems of record, those kinds of things, but they aren't consolidating the information and analyzing it in effective ways to gather additional insight out of what's being collected. Frequently, you'll wind up in situations where companies will we would walk in and you start to interview different stakeholders within the organization, and they refer to one report that they have that their organization delivers, and that's their version of the truth. And then you walk over to a different department within the company, and they have their version of what's supposed to be the same report, but it's their version of the truth with different numbers involved. So as you move further right, data becomes more and more integral to the overall strategy of the business. So it's not just operational in nature, right? You might start to see businesses within opportunistic and systematic, they are getting more effective at utilizing their data to generate analysis and insights. But it is not yet core to the overall strategy of the business. They're utilizing it to become more efficient in operations. IT has a bit stronger voice in identifying the need for certain types of solutions to deliver for the business. So you're going to have more consolidation. You're going to have formalized requirements for data and availability of that data. you might have competing initiatives from a data perspective. So you don't have that overarching consolidated strategy yet coming from the top down. But from a bottom up perspective, the concepts of data utilization and what it means to the organization overall is starting to gain more momentum. All right. So as we move into systematic and into differentiating, what we start to see is we start to see a shift where the data becomes crucial to the overall strategy of the business. So it's not just about generating systems that generate data and utilizing that data for insight and analysis. It becomes that they're starting to figure out ways to monetize the data potentially. So data collection and that analysis becomes a mechanism for revenue for the business overall. You also will start to see more and more business champions at higher levels within the organization are championing initiatives, defining strategies around what data is utilized for, what it means for the business, and much more momentum around investments being made in the data. When you fully hit transformational, that's where it is core. Everything about data, the analysis of it, data science, the collection of it, the efficiencies gained from it are core to what the business does. And frequently you would see a chief data officer sitting, so a C-suite executive who is dedicated to ensuring that data is integral to the business and is maintained going forward for the health of the business and its overall operations. So give you sort of a more real world example of how we think about this. There is a major agricultural equipment manufacturer who shall remain nameless, but you could likely guess, who went from building tractors and other types of farm equipment, so very traditional manufacturing organization, to starting to generate and utilizing data in just the pure normal operations of the business. So supply chain management, some amount of sales forecasting, all of those kinds of what we would call basic to opportunistic types initiatives and maturity overall, to starting to put sensors on all of their equipment that goes out into the field. And then once those sensors are in place, it allowed them to be much more proactive, considering that a large number of the tractors that go out into large-scale agribusiness are actually owned by the manufacturer and leased out in various agreements in various ways. They started utilizing that sensor data to be more proactive about maintenance in the field. They also utilized those sensors and data to have a greater understanding of what crops were being planted where, and how those crops were being managed and delivered from both seed all the way through until harvest. And then that data became integral to how they both operated the business, but also were able to monetize it. It's extremely valuable data to, as you can imagine, the governments of the world and other large-scale agribusiness, seed suppliers, fertilizer suppliers, those kinds of things, those kinds of businesses. That this is very, very impactful insight that the company is able to generate through having these sensors out in the field and the data pipeline in which they're able to create. So that is an idea of how a business moves from the left side of the spectrum to a much more transformational. And it's not a short path. This is over 10, 15 years they've gone through this process. if not even longer. But you can think of the time scales of certainly of years to move from where your business is operating, consolidating data potentially and utilizing it for reporting, to where data is core to what your business does. It's a path to revenue, and overall, it's the lifeline of the business overall. One of the other things before we get to, we're going to make this a little bit more, sort of even more specific, and tie it to some of the engagements, a couple of the engagements that Blueprint itself has participated in, so that we can make it even a little bit more concrete. But prior to handing it off to Chris and Dan to talk through that, one of the other things that we wanted to look at was, let's just real quick level set on what types of solutions we're talking about within these companies, the various ecosystems that we typically encounter, and the components of those ecosystems overall. I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through this slide. Feel free after the webinar is over to be able to come back and pause on this and read through it in more detail. But to talk at just very, very quickly, so some of the different technologies that we're talking about, these are data warehouse solutions, right? We think about data lakes, data warehouse solution being sort of that centralized repository of data from disparate systems. It's typically been cleansed. It is a aggregated representation of potentially many different systems of record that a business utilizes for typical operations at the department level. But the warehouse is the place where things get consolidated, discipline gets applied, so that reports can be consistent across the entire organization, you're able to provide some rigor and cleansing associated with that data. Then we have data lakes. Data lakes speak a little bit more to stripping away some of the discipline associated with data warehousing and providing potentially a faster access to different data sources. So the ability to bring in an unstructured, potentially unstructured data set, or relatively unstructured data set, into an environment that allows it to be utilized for analysis across different teams or different departments within a company, but it doesn't go through the rigorous cleansing process that something would go through in a warehouse. It doesn't go through formal normalization, those kinds of things. We're dumping it into a place so that we have some centralization, and we get the opportunities that centralization provides, both in data access and scale, but we're not applying all of the rules that can sometimes slow down access to data or availability of data, such as what happens potentially in a data warehouse. Streaming data is a more sophisticated way of providing data in closer to real time, in still a structured way, but allowing different applications within the organization, different data structures in the organization, to have access to data as it's being generated, as I said, in real time or near real time, from these generation applications from these systems of record in different parts of the organization. That stream of data can feed multiple things. It can feed a warehouse. It can feed reporting systems. It could feed other applications. It's sort of a more modern version of sort of the publication and subscription of data that happened in traditional data warehouse solutions, or in just general database solutions overall. And then, of course, on top of that, we have analytical tools that allow us to dig into the data, allow us to gain insights, provide reporting to the organization, tap into these repositories that are being built. It's not always the case that you can think of, the level of sophistication within these solutions of data warehouse, being sort of the first step within the data maturity model, and then data lakes and streaming data. Not all companies take a journey in that way through these different types of solutions. In fact, frequently within an organization, you might see all three of these represented, and all four of them, including the analytics tools as well. But you will generally think about, it's certainly not the case, or would be unlikely for a business that is in basic or even a pre-basic, right? They're still doing spreadsheets, to have some type of streaming solution, or potentially a streaming solution to make sense for that business. There is some amount of sophistication associated with both data lakes and streaming data overall, that doesn't necessarily match well with companies that are on an earlier stage of their overall data journey. Okay, so having laid both the overall maturity model out and gone through sort of how we're thinking about it at a very high level, data solutions in different ecosystems, I want to shift over now and go through and hand it off to my colleagues and allow them to go through some specific use cases in which they can talk about how this assessment played out for them, and then how they went through the process of solutioning and then on to change management and transformation overall. So first up, we have a data consolidation effort, and this I'll hand over to Dan.
To Chris, actually. Thanks, Josh. So the use case I'd like to walk through is an example project at a large health insurance company. Originally, the client brought us in because they were evaluating several cloud-based solutions for CRM and SPM, but they knew these cloud-based tools only function as good as the data that they're running on. So we came in to kind of take a look at helping them with that, but then taking a wider look at their data landscape and helping them. And we discovered some additional concerns once we were chatting with them. The first concern was that their IT data teams were really struggling to keep up. A lot of it was because of the changes in regulations. Healthcare regulations seem to change frequently, especially with when we get different government rules coming in, especially around privacy and so forth. So they were having to like reinvent the wheel every year. So they just couldn't keep up or work on new initiatives because they were too busy working with the changes in regulations. The second major issue they had is that at that time, the U.S. government healthcare marketplace was fairly new, and the data from it was extremely dirty, and they had no control over that because the government owned that website and that data, and they would just get a feed of it, but they would need to consume it in order to set up these health insurance plans for people. This wasted a ton of money for them because they would have to pay referral bonuses to different brokerages that would send people to the government site. They would get partial or duplicate applications would be coming in through that website. So they would set something up and they would realize, oh, this person already has a policy with someone else and it's invalid, et cetera. And then they had a lot of time they were wasting just weeding out this bad data and working through it, often very manually. And the final issue they had was that the data was very siloed at the company. Different groups had their own solutions. Those solutions weren't consistent across the board. This had happened organically over time with different lines of business coming up and doing it their way, but mostly it happened because they purchased other companies. And when you purchase another company, they have their own way of doing it. Sometimes you want to let them keep doing it, but at the end of the day, you still need a single version of the truth. So they had a data warehouse that they were using to try and reconcile these silos. But the problem they had there is because of some of the other issues I talked about, the data was always so late to the party that it was out of date by the time it was usable. And the different business groups didn't want to cooperate with the warehouse group because that would mean more cost and more time on their projects. So Josh was talking about the data maturity spectrum, And this company didn't really fit in one box, and we see that at a lot of companies. They don't always cleanly fit in one box. They'll have certain groups and teams that are off to the right, and some that are more off to the left, working on an access database on someone's desktop, we've even seen. So overall, the company, I would say, was in the systematic box, but different groups going one way or the other, being more mature or less mature. So what do we do in this case? Well, we came in, we talked through all those various issues. We spent about a week just going through them and interviewing different people, talking with them, getting their pain points across different teams, kind of being that independent advisor. So you could talk to us and not have to talk to someone else directly. And then we took a stab at working with them on designing kind of a new infrastructure that would be more helpful. And I called this the inverted triangle one, because we'd start wide at the top with the data sources and going all the way down to the bottom. So at the top was the data sources, and what we built with them was some data scrubbers. So especially stuff like the government data, that we could hit that right away, right in its raw format, and get it as clean as possible, as soon as possible. So we set up some designs using some new technology like machine learning and some products there that could really help them know which data was good, could go through right away quickly, or which data they had to set aside to have kind of a second look at, or at least a confidence ratio on the rating on the data itself. So those things that they needed ASAP, such as data to pay commissions to sales reps and brokerages, because they always want to be paid as soon as possible, they could use the known good data, and then they would be able to see the data that was questionable and not get paid on it right away. But they could still see it out there, which was key, because otherwise they were getting lots of phone calls saying, "Hey, why haven't I been paid for Bob Smith?" And that's because Bob Smith hadn't been processed yet. In this case, they could say, "Hey, Bob Smith's had some stuff that raised a flag for us, and we need to take a second look at it." But they already saw that Bob Smith was on their screen and said, "Hey, this is under review." So that saves a lot of time and money as well. And it's also very difficult if they were to pay commissions and then claw them back. That's what they were doing in some cases where it was bad data. That's also very costly for the company. So just kind of being upfront about it, applying new technology, they were able to have a huge win right there. Then the middle level was those data lakes or data marts, and they would take the scrub data directly from those little data scrubbers, or directly if the data didn't need scrubbing. And the business groups more maintained these middle levels and used the data from them. And then finally, we still had the data warehouse, but we were changing the data warehouse, because previously the data warehouse would be sitting on all those data sources and doing all that work all over again, which that's just duplicating work. So the data warehouse would be feeding directly out of the data lakes. The business groups would be responsible for reporting the data in the way that the data warehouse wanted, but it removed a lot of work from the data warehouse team, so they were freed up to work on some more of these changes with regulations and stuff that was happening. So thank you, Josh. I hand it back to you.
Thanks, Chris. So now it's Dan's turn to talk a bit about cloud transformation opportunity here at Blueprint.
Hello, everyone. So this afternoon, I want to talk about a client of ours that we did recently. This is fairly just over January of this year. We had a client that was looking to move from an on-prem position and into the cloud. And this was a strategy that they were interested in, but not terribly sure on how to execute. And from a maturity perspective, they really fell into the opportunistic column. Traditional data team working with on-prem RDBMS tools, traditional ETL processes, where one drops a file into a specific location and it's picked up by the database and loaded into a data warehouse or perhaps an operational data store. So very, very traditional shop. but knowing that they wanted to move the bar a bit. They wanted to start to look at things like data lakes and things like streaming services and different analytics tools, and felt that there might be a better way to do that. So we spent some time with them discussing these things. They had very specific databases that they were looking at moving, or very specific subject matters that they wanted to move. And they wanted to position themselves to take advantage of new tools. So through discussions, we understood what their use case was. We started to form an idea of what the business use might be, or what the business case might be for doing that kind of thing. And we very quickly came up with a quick run plan. We basically provided them a run book that said, okay, here's how you can move from point A to point B. And at the end of it, when you arrive in Azure by implementing this run book, you should be in a position where you can start to leverage. You've got the beginnings of a data lake that you can build on. You've got streaming tools at your disposal, and you can now start to leverage streaming tools where you can perhaps load. You have the option of loading, say, into a Hadoop cluster and being able to query the data in very near real time. Or you can fork off that stream, and while you're loading your Hadoop cluster, you can load your data into a data warehouse and have a bit more structure, and aggregate your data and have that historical data available to end users. And in addition to that, start leveraging some of the newer tools that are available in the cloud, things like Looker, and there's many others, I'm sure. And as we kind of work through this idea, there was the realization that there's some really cool things at the end of this, and management got in behind it and said, let's do it. Let's do a pilot project. And I think that what we really saw was this company starting to move out of this opportunistic column and more into the systematic column, where they're starting to differentiate their content and treat it differently. They're starting to be able to offer the data for use in different business units in near real time, and really provide access to end users. So it was pretty exciting to see how this very small and contained project could set the groundwork for a much bigger initiatives, and hopefully buy some people over and break down some of those barriers that people have to want to do things differently. So we're actually in the process of executing on that now. It's generating a lot of excitement. I'm pretty excited about it, and looking forward to seeing them be successful. So back to you, Josh.
Gentlemen, thank you. I very much appreciate in both of those examples. One, Chris, with yours, how a company, department by department, can sort of exist in different stages of overall data maturity. In some places, as evidenced by the number of solutions that they might have available and who utilizes those solutions within a single company. I think that's fantastic. And what I really love about your example, Dan, is I think it's a fantastic example of how cloud transformation can enable all of these different opportunities and different strategies for upping the level of sophistication and overall maturity that a business has around its data, and how it both manages that data and leverages that data. I mean, it's hugely powerful to be able to make that transformation into the cloud, and then with an environment like Microsoft's Azure, all the tools that suddenly become available, and at a relatively low bar of of experimentation, proof of concept, those kinds of things, you can prove out value very, very quickly for a business. I think it's a very, very powerful thing to, just as you said, generate excitement, win over naysayers, right? Provide near-term business value. All of those things become available. So, can't say enough about what a cloud transformation can mean for a business to move relatively rapidly further to the right on the overall maturity scale. So we're almost out of time here, but what I would like to do is, one, say thank you to Chris and Dan for helping me out and in this webinar and providing some really interesting insights into how we think about data solutions at Blueprint. We're going to open it up for questions here, and then we'll wrap things up. So, are there any questions?
Doesn't look like we have anybody raising their hands, but I very much appreciate everyone who took the time to join us. Please follow us on LinkedIn for future webinar. If you need to reach out to us and contact us, certainly you can find us on LinkedIn, like I said, but you can also find us at marketing@bpcs.com. Reach out to us, and we'll get back to you and schedule some time to talk if you have specific things you'd like to talk about with your business. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time.